Today I'm here with Cesca, and I'm thrilled to be talking about issues around pornography and adult entertainment. So Cesca Lee is a content creator and educator. She has worked in the field of adult entertainment since 1998. With both BAs in psychology and child studies, Cesca worked as an educational consultant. And then in 1998, she decided to stray off the beaten path and created an independent adult website that chronicled her personal life through photos, videos, live webcamming, and journals. Not unlike reality TV personalities or current day lifestyle YouTube stars, what was once private became public and professional. Her website endeavors led her to write articles and essays on eroticism, relationships, body image, sex worker rights, feminism, and sexual health, and many other subjects. In 2010, Cesca retired from porn and writing about sexuality and relationships to focus on personal development and holistic well-being. She studied nutrition, aging, and personal growth modalities, which you can read more about at her website, cescalee.com. In March 2020, she returned to the world of porn at Just for Fans, and she's excited to turn 50, yay, and share her unique and authentic content with her fans. So please welcome one of my favorite people, Cesca, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I love having this conversation with you, and it keeps growing and changing as we do, and the world does.
It's true. We've known each other for many years now, and we've been talking to groups for many years about pornography, about adult entertainment, but also people's assumptions about, the kind of people that work in the industry or the kind of people that partake in any sort of way in the industry. And I've always found that, your amazing knowledge and insights really shatter a lot of the stereotypes that many people hold because they really just don't know a lot about this field. So what I'd love to start off with is your story about how you got into this field and sort of, discovered it. And then of course became one of the most, people at the forefront at the turn of, the internet and live streaming. You were right there at the beginning of all of this. Yeah. So tell us how that all happened.
So I like to just, start off with I won't go through all my childhood, but just to say, I grew up super outside of Montreal in the suburbs with a very suburban experience of, going to church, Girl Guides, high school, etc., and was a really keen student. And so, but I was always interested in sex. And I don't mean in having the sex, reading about the sex. So when I look back, it all makes sense, how I ended up in the sex industry. A very common misconception and sort of push back to the sex industry is someone say, would you want your daughter to do this? And no one wants to grow up to be a sex worker. And in fact, there are a lot of people who are very interested in sex, and that is part of their journey towards sex work. And that is mine. So I feel like when you are even one, there must be others like you, and I have met such people. So that's my background. I, did university, that kind of thing. And the internet just started getting interesting and opening up and becoming a thing. You had your your email account through your university. That was the first way and only way you could access the internet was through your university. And so I got online, and then, finally you get your own computer, your own dial-up and that thing, and your own home. And I discover adult websites. And by adult websites, I mean a lot of message boards and sort of these lists of sometimes photos, but a lot of text about sexuality, swinging, kink, BDSM, and negotiating all of those things. And it was very informative, but still illicit because it was all in black with red font, and you'd be all like naughty and everything.
I'm not even sure, by the way, that most of our listeners would know what dial-up is.
Right, as you plugged into your phone line and you couldn't answer the phone while you were online. You could do one or the other.
Yeah.
So, and it would make that noise that you'll hear in the movies. And so, yeah, it was a big thing. But like when you decided to go online, you weren't just casually on your phone, like on the toilet, You were like, I am sitting down, I am logging on. So it's really purposeful interaction with any material, but certainly sexual material. And at that point, I was with my partner. I had a partner for all of the porn making of the 2000s, and so we were dating, living together, married, and we are since divorced. So it kind of changes the story a little bit later on. But during the marriage and during the working of it on the site, we were connected. We were true partners. So we were like, oh, I think we should, have sex without love. What does that look like? Let's become swingers. We're interested in those, we're having those conversations as partners. And we're online. And I discovered someone named Carol Cox, who was out of Montreal and was one of the first 3 people to have their own personal website online, women, I should say. And so she had made a home video of her having sex and masturbating and sold that on the website and made a ton of money. It was very, very amateur, very much voyeuristic, certainly all consensual because it was her and her husband who made this video. And it was for people who wanted to see an average housewife being sexual. And certainly not something you saw a lot of in porn at that time, which was highly glamorized, kind of coming out of that Motley Crue style rock girl look that was really common in strip clubs as well as in porn. So she was an antithesis. And so even though we don't look anything alike, and she was actually 10 years older than I was, I'm around 26 or so at this time. So, and she's in her 30s. She's just had her 3rd kid. But I saw, oh, there's an opportunity to be in the sex industry as yourself. And like there's not only is there like a platform and a way to do it, but now we're starting to have the means of doing it, which is digital cameras were starting. So you didn't have to take your picture and go get them developed by the person who also gives you your prescriptions and your tampons, at the pharmacy.
Another thing a lot of people may not know about, right? Like we used to have to go to the store to develop our film.
and so it wasn't private. I mean, you couldn't, how do you do this with privacy and not? And so there was just like the middleman kind of involved always. And similarly, there was a middleman to make porn. You had to be hired to make porn, work in a production company. They did have like a star system back then. There was some amateur porn going on, certainly. There's a very famous company called Homegrown Video, and I do recommend kind of go looking into them because their history is really interesting. They started in 1982. And I'm familiar with the owners and worked with them. They're really cool people. But all to say that this was really like, oh my gosh, I can work from my own home and I can start exploring my sexuality and making money off it. And that ultimately was important to me. I was happy working as an education consultant, but I was heading towards burnout. My husband at the time, he was doing stats, like data entry stats for a medical research company, not matching too much with our values, his work. And we were like, okay, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? Took a year to decide, and then we did it. Now, the production, there's sort of 2 parts of my story. One is sort of the nitty gritty of just making porn and that journey, which was very exploratory. Tried some things, don't need to do it again, was really fun. Other stuff, really like this, let's keep doing it. Amazing to work with similar couples as ourselves and the bonds we had, even though we have very little in common other than this love of this work and the entrepreneurial spirit of kind of like, okay, what's the next billing company that's going to be awesome? Oh, what lens do you use? And it was fun. And then we were friends having sex. So if that works for you and that's something you like, which I did, I loved it. In fact, it was very friends with benefits, and the benefit was paying our bills as well. And so there was all of that, but it was definitely a hustle, and it was a grind, and not in the sex way. It was every single day we had to produce content or in some manner. We didn't have a lot of support or infrastructure, so we had to make sure we're online to make sure customer service was getting done. It's all the things when you run your own business, but felt like there was a lot of pressure because if this went down, like the site went down, we could lose a lot of money. It would be very, it was just it was a lot of stress. But we're combining it with our sexual experiences. Some people maybe were able to compartmentalize. I was not very good at it. I think in part because I was having sex, all of my sex life was on camera, all of it. So I felt like if I had any sexual energy, I had to produce something with it. and it had to be part of the business. So like, honey, I don't want to do it tonight happened a lot because I had just had sex with 2, 3 girls that day, you know, young women. Or we just done a whole bunch of foot fetish shooting and had cramps all over my legs or something. Like it just was, it was hard. It was hard work. And I kept trying to like find ways in which to navigate all those emotions and my desire and my relationship. And I feel like it's something that it's super heightened. A lot of couples will deal with this, but when it's your business, it's a lot. It was a lot. So that was certainly a pressure on our marriage. The other thing was, that was the personal. There was a second part component. Well, how about you ask a couple of questions and I'm sure I'll find.
Sure. What's really interesting for me is I think this idea that we often don't reflect a lot on individuals who are in porn and what their personal relationships look like, right? And you know, what does it look like with their partners? So you were saying that this was a real stress on your marriage. So when you did, you know, have sex with your husband and you were off camera, was that somehow different, or you guys never really did that?
It was very different in that I was an exhibitionist and really comfortable and aroused by filming. He was not at all. He was very, very private, even though like I would say his rational mind and his philosophy and values were, this is fine to share, but not me. Like and I don't mean it it was just his personal preference for himself. It actually made him feel constricted to do it. And so it was a challenge. That being said, I always had a photographer because he was never in the picture on camera. Now we did set up tripods and film a lot together, but it was still there. It sort of blended. It was still like we did the things we like to do. And we especially did the things he liked to do because he had to maintain an erection. Yeah. I can kind of like fumble my way through like, yeah, that's fine. As long as it's not painful and it's not a real turn off, I could kind of just go with the flow and kind of do it. But he really had to be turned on. So we had to do the things that made him erect, made him have an orgasm, made him ejaculate, and on cue. So like our cam show was 9 to 10 p.m. every single Tuesday for at least 5 solid years, maybe 8, close to 8. That we had sex every Tuesday, 9 p.m. Hilariously, after Fear Factor or The Biggest Loser, we'd watch a little TV before. Totally inappropriate, like non-sexual shows. I can't explain it. But that shows the grind that you just like, you watch your little thing and then, you know, you get on camera and you do your thing and then you eat pizza.
Was that the after go-to?
Yeah, we, you know, have a little snack. I'm usually actually a cereal after anything stressful. Let's go have, or expending energy. But there was a point where obviously he's not having as much sex as I am. Hilariously, I'm not satisfying his want of sex, but I'm very satisfied because I'm masturbating or doing it in some form or another 5 to 7 days a week. And in my head, I start thinking, because I'm not meeting his need, which his need was probably just let's do it once or twice off camera, but I'm just done. I'm thinking I'm not sexual. I started thinking I'm a not sexual person because I was just only having performative work sex. I started thinking about, okay, I got to have a private sex life. But unfortunately for him, I ended up taking a lover instead. I had a boyfriend at the time. Now, we all knew about each other. It was all very polyamorous. Why? I know why I chose that, but that was it. It's like I was starting to spread myself too thin, like between 2 partners and stuff. Anyhow, that's the polyamory sort of conversation, but it was a part of the story and is a part of the many stories for sex workers of all kinds. But in terms of porn, there are people who only shoot with their partner. Mm-hmm. Some people only shoot with the person of the same sex, but their partner is opposite sex or the reverse. Similarly with escorting and things like that, they're just like, you can go see these kinds of clients, but not these clients. And it can be a negotiation or it's a compromise, like really kind of like, okay, if I need to do this work, but I still really want to be with you. I don't have a problem with having sex with either sex, but you really do. So I'm going to maybe
So I think, like in any relationship, although it seems that it would be much more heightened here, there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen, a lot of discussion around
There does.
obligations, boundaries, and probably a lot more honesty that needs to happen, right? Like really putting it out there. What are your feelings? What are your fears? Where are your limits?
And certainly the safer sex conversations are a little bit more because of depending where you are working in the industry. In amateur, like our amateur porn, we were swinging couples, so I always used condoms. We didn't rely on testing to decide whether we could do certain acts. It was like condoms. We got tested, but we weren't part of the testing regime. There is an actual testing, like companies and databases for the big time producing companies, and that has been going on since the HIV/AIDS crisis. They're like around 90 or so that they've had different ones. This is LA, Las Vegas, Florida, maybe a bit of New York, those kinds of cities that have the pro companies. But we didn't have that. So we just condoms, condoms. And it's funny, I talked to old time fans and they were like, oh, we so wanted to see you without like not using condoms. Like they get fetishized. But for me, it was really easy. And there is a complaint, interestingly, in the mainstream porn about condoms because they say, oh, with the lights and the amount of sex we have, that they're really irritating. I get that. And I got very irritated from condoms and I had to use the non-latex ones. But the fact that like we were able to manage it, I think I don't know so much about the mainstream porn business when they say that, I think it's really about what customers are asking and less about the performers. But that's
Well,
an
it's such an
aside.
interesting discussion because, I work a lot in the field of sex education and certainly with youth. And one of the biggest discussions we have over and over again is about how youth are exposed to porn at earlier and earlier ages. And of course, there's a whole, plethora of discussions to be had there and, some of the difficulties or challenges with that. But the big one that comes up time and time again is the fact that, youth generally are exposed to images, sexual images and porn where they're not using condoms. Right? Like that seems to be, the biggest message and the biggest challenge then for educators to sort of go back and re-educate and say, no,
They are getting tested in ways that are every 2 weeks and they share it with everybody in the group.
Yeah.
And now with COVID, well, this won't be evergreen when we talk about COVID, but I was just sat in on a panel where a doctor who works with organizations, including sex work, porn industry, and is just saying the amount of testing that sex workers get in the mainstream industries outweighs, it's comparable to healthcare workers.
Wow.
And maybe even sometimes better because the databases are so focused and all that information is shared. So all to say, there's a lot that you don't see going on behind the scenes, no matter what
That's
content
right.
you're watching, pro, amateur, camming, etc. And
That's
what
really
is needed is that media literacy.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I sort of, I talk to a lot of youth about and I train educators is that, what you're seeing, it looks quite real, but there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that are going on that you're not necessarily aware of. And of course, the absence of the condom, the reason that's there is because there is testing that's going on.
Right.
That people wouldn't, necessarily be aware of. And to your point, I've often heard, lots of fear and discussion around sexually transmitted infections sort of being, centralized to a small group of people and often, sex workers, or there'll be people that have a lot of sex. And I've always maintained that sex workers, as far as I know, are typically far better at protecting themselves than the average person because this is their body, their livelihood, and they're much more educated on why it's important,
And so if you have, if you're part of the testing world, and you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, and you would be using protection with that boyfriend or girlfriend because you might be in like a more open situation, but you don't want something from home to come and mess up your job, especially when you can only work maybe once or twice a month. Like if you mess up your window of, testing and, the numbers also, like there are certain higher, gonorrhea is more common. Is common. I shouldn't say it's more common. It is common, but gonorrhea is very quick to, identify and it doesn't kill you at this point.
And it
But
can be serious,
there's been
God.
very few cases of HIV, and these are thousands upon thousands, like hundreds of thousands of tests that have been happening. There's been like a couple of cases of syphilis. And often it is
And
from people who are shooting outside
yeah.
or doing something outside
Yeah.
and should know better.
I just thought it was important to sort of debunk this one myth that, you know, it's generally sex workers that, you know, house all the STIs, when in fact, sex workers are far more cautious and protect themselves on average much better than the average person who thinks, well, I'm not going to catch anything, you know?
I mean, comparable to, like, we always often go to construction. A professional construction worker will wear the hard toe boots. But the one at home is doing a little something there and there. And who gets in the hospital? The person working at home. It is
really good
like,
point.
if you know the risks, they know to do, you know, the protection. An interesting aside, I've also worked as an escort, and some of the most, like, there would be two things, but doctors, if their doctors were your customers, they would use everything. You'd use your dental dam, you use your condom, you use your gloves, you wouldn't kiss. And they just, you know, they were really good clients because they were just like, I've seen too much. I've seen too much. So.
Okay, I love this. This is a perfect segue into talking about, you know, the difference between escorting and porn. But this is a hilarious point that I guess I wouldn't have thought of, that those that work in the health profession who are your clients when you're escorting are the ones that'll protect themselves the most.
That it happened a lot. I had a couple who would lie and say other people who say they were doctors and they get tested regularly, and I'm like, BS, go away, foo. Yes, yeah. So, yeah.
So talk to us about, because not everybody that works, you know, in making films also works in escorting. I mean, they're two very different things. So how do they differ? And, you know, what are some of the things that you learned perhaps through escorting? That would be great to know.
Well, so I did porn and focused on my independent porn site from the 98 to 2008. That's when the you know, the recession happened. So the Great Recession happened, and my income had dropped tremendously on my website because it was when torrent sites and file sharing and just so much of my porn was stolen, and people just stopped paying for it. It was a huge impact, not just mine. It's something that all the industry, be it a really super pro to the super amateur, had to deal with and rethink our business models, which was mainly subscription sites at that time. And not live camming per minute, which I'm sure the students are really aware of, all those Chatterbait, Streammates, all the little they're not little, they're huge cam networks. But so that's what started, like, mushrooming up after all that stolen porn, was live content. And that's when I tried briefly webcamming, did not like it. I had friends who were escorts, and I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. It's very, very different than the way in which I created porn, and it's a very different thing. And so in my head, I break it down to two kinds of things. One kind is production of sex, documenting sex. That's porn, and that's one part. And then the other one will be service. Now, the service can happen in person, which would be escorting, which would be private dancing at strip clubs, that kind of thing. And then the other one is now like online service. You need totally two different headspaces to do them. Some people might be able to use the same one all the time. Some people are big persona as their porn performer. I wasn't. It was authentic sexuality, my relationship, my reality. But escorting is client driven. And yes, you have a physical type, so you are kind of a persona. And so you are blonde, you are brunette. I actually never did escorting with my natural hair. I always did brown wigs. That's for a whole other story. But yeah, it was just like I had to have a bit of a persona as an escort because I had to meet like kind of a clientele's needs, wants, desires, and find kind of clients that I liked. So playing up my maturity, playing up my love of having sex with couples, things like that was what I did. But it's people are touching your body. People are in your body. And they're not people you're turned on by. You might find them really nice. You might find them really interesting. It is really rare that you're like, I am hot for you. It's more like, I like you. You're sweet. Okay, I'll have sex with you. And I might even come and I might have a good time. But it's not like if I saw you walking down the street, I wouldn't go, and here's my number or whatever, like you wouldn't. And they're all, you have more pleasant, boring clients, in my experience, than hot, let's tear each other's clothes off clients. While in the swinging and porn, I had a lot of hot, tear your clothes off experiences, way more.
Got it. Have you ever had a client that you were really turned off by?
Yes, yes. And sometimes they were really nice, but there were um it sounds harsh, but like you end up having a great amount of compassion. Certain people with certain physical ailments and things like that, where you're just like, oh my gosh. Like I had someone who couldn't tear, so they had a lot of like very unusual eyes. I had some people with major skin conditions that just covered in things, not transmittable or anything like that. But so you're not in love with that person, so you can't connect with them. So you have to kind of go really quickly to, this is a human being who needs touch and intimacy, and they have trouble getting it because of this. So it's not a turn off, but it's like you really are tapping into service, kindness, nurturing, and giving them something special. But it's your first reaction, because they don't tell you in your email necessarily, and you go, oh, okay, this is what's going on. And you have to quickly, it's like anything intimate. If someone walks into your business and you're like, oh, that person has an unusual this or that.
Yeah.
And they didn't tell me about it. Like I had people in wheelchairs not tell me they were in wheelchairs. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, my space might not be appropriate for you. Anyways, but you have to be, that's a difference between the porn. Porn is very planned. You have to be able to be very flexible, spontaneous, reactive.
What a great discussion though, because I don't think we talk about this a lot. I really don't.
No, it just came up. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do know in other parts of the world, like I want to say Sweden, I hope I'm right about that. What the government does, in the case you were talking about with the individuals with special needs, the government does offer and pay for sexual services.
I think that would be Amsterdam. Sweden has a very anti-sex work model, which is that it's all exploitation.
Sweden and advanced in sex education, but I got it not in sex,
but not in sex work. As so yes, there is and there are providers. There's I don't know their name, but I can pass it on off the top of my head. I don't know, out of Australia, that does, and it's not what you think of as in terms of a sex surrogate. They're just really, really good with people with special needs, and it can include learning needs and intellectual needs, because they work with the family of the person to have a very boundaried but very appropriate experience for their adult child. And so like you need to be, this is someone who's well trained and such, but they really would identify and say they were a sex worker, but with this amazing clientele.
I think this really sort of taps into some of the misconceptions around the field, around pornography, around escorting, around individuals who use the services or offer the services, because I think that there's a lot of, from what I've heard from students and society, there's a lot of negative connotations, but what we're talking about here is something that doesn't get highlighted enough, that there's a tremendous amount of compassion in some of this work, and that there's a whole other side to it.
It's really a spectrum of experiences on both sides of customers, clients, and the providers. There are people who are doing this to make ends meet, to survive, for housing. Some people won't even call themselves sex workers, but they will do things in a sort of an exchange and barter system. And I think if you go to certain aspects of sex worker activism, they will allow for all of the experiences to be recognized and valid. The ones that are very difficult and challenging and painful and traumatic to the point, and then those who have more positive experiences, or they feel that they've found their calling. Some people, it's just like, I'm doing this for now. I don't want to do it forever. It's okay. And then other people, it's just like, for me, I realized that this was it's my muse. Sex work is my muse. It's what inspires me. Sex workers inspire me. And so it clicked. That being said, I've had some horrible experiences, both in porn and, you know, I've had sexual assault situations that I think I would not have had it not been a work situation. An example is clients who seem perfectly nice, but the fact that they're paying you, they don't care that you're saying no. And they're not being aggressive or violent, but they just think, well, I pay you. And you will see that in Twitter threads. Well, you can't rape a prostitute. It's like, no, you can. If someone says no, or it's really hard to say no when $1,000 is sitting on the table. So you kind of like just go through the motions, even though this person is horribly racist or saying, you know, maybe that doesn't fall under rape, but it certainly is not
Pleasurable.
a fully embodied, empowered.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I remember taking gigs, I call them gigs, but appointments or dates, and saying, oh, well, you know, I got rent. So this client, he's actually kind of like, he never brushes his teeth. He's disgusting. I'm going to see him anyway. He's a known entity. I've seen him already. I'll see him again. So there's like, you're making compromises and choices. And so there, it will happen. Yeah. So it's a spectrum of experiences.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. What are some other misconceptions that you've heard about people who offer services or who, you know, want services either around pornography or other kinds of sex work? Like,
I think the drug one is really common. I think that's because like we have we do have a history of like organized crime working in drugs and selling drugs and then also having a prostitution, but that's because they're both criminalized. So criminals will just look for other criminal activity. So but throw that out. You know, like there's a lot of people, and especially now there's just very little pimping going on. People manage themselves, or they really make it an agreement to have a manager or an agent. It's not quite as seedy. And now, yes, there are people who abuse that, and you will see that more in a younger population. Though it can happen in older, but like someone who is your boyfriend and then all of a sudden, hey, let's put a Craigslist ad, let's put a this ad. It does happen. But it's really a smaller slice of the pie. Adding to that, just going to put my decriminalization hat. When we close these sites down that advertise because they think it's going to disappear, it just goes somewhere else. And now you can't find that somewhere else. So you can't find those people who are being exploited. Just putting that out there. So you want advertising venues no matter what the work is, because then you can track who's adult and who's not, and who's consenting and who's not.
Well, and
who's reputable as well. Who's a reputable provider, because there's some thievery that goes on the other side. It does happen. There's some angry sex workers, and they will, for various reasons, it could be just related to sex work. They could just be angry, who might take advantage of clients. Again, small portion. So that's a myth, you know, like of just they're all Johns, they're all tricks. I mean, where's that word come from, right? Like you're tricking someone into paying you or something. So these are stories. There's a little bit of truth in all stories. Is it the majority? Drugs, sex abuse.
Yeah.
We're all been daddy issues. Oh, the daddy issues. We all have some sort of relationship with our parents.
To your point, right, there's always, of course, you're going to find people who are sex workers who have issues of abandonment or issues with their parents. You're going to find that in any population you look at, right? But I think, you know, they sort of get blown out of proportion, you know, and it's certainly not representational, just like, you know, drug use. You're going to find a certain percentage of people that are using drugs in any group you look to, right?
Exactly.
But it gets, you know, overblown in this when related to sex work, when that's not the case.
Right.
Yeah. And I love speaking to you because you have not only firsthand experience, but also you understand the research. You understand, you have the knowledge of sort of, you know, the field, and really could, you know, debunk a lot of the stuff that people just make assumptions about. So leave us with one thing that you really want people to know about sex workers.
It comes from, I believe, the actually drug users, but the the statement, not with us, not about us without us. So if you want to investigate or explore sex workers or sex work, the sex industry, what aspect of it, ask sex workers and
Yeah.
go to their blogs, go see what they're saying, and don't go to their promotional. We promoting our promotional material. Our promotional Twitter is going to be all sorts of stuff because we're selling. We're busy selling. I'm now on sex worker Twitter in the sense of like hustling on sex work. But I'd love to have another Twitter where I can talk more like this about the nuances. But when someone's trying to get off, they don't want to hear my complicated story with a billing company or something, or my marriage and having sex with people, and I was like a little confused or something. Anyway, so
research on decriminalization.
yeah, let's
Hear about
decrim.
that?
Yeah. So, but and there are some good films and things like that. So you can get into the world, but try to see it through the lens of the person doing the work. The customer stories are a little trickier. People, and this is interesting. If you are a customer, and I suspect most everyone has looked at, explicit material, erotic material for pleasure, at some point in their life, try to think about who you are and why you're doing it. Work on a little self-reflective exercise of why do I like, and not just much like tits, I like ass or something. It was just like, oh, I'm doing this because I'm tense right now. Okay, there's other people who are tense. Oh, COVID has caused a lot of people to go online and do things. I'm missing touch. Oh my gosh, and then even if you do like a kinky thing, something more on the less common, I would say, look into that and do it with some compassion and try to put that compassion into other people. This would be a great thing I would wish for, because it is a huge part of, unfortunately, with the internet, but also with sex work now, the incel movement of only certain women are allowed to have your attention and not attention. There is a hatred of sex workers from this movement. And it comes down to, you won't have sex with me, so you're a whore. It's a nice conflict of a paradoxical statement, but this is a big thing that's going on. And I suspect, like, if you have friends who are talking that way, if you're able to speak up, because the sex worker can't always speak up in those situations, see if you can investigate those conversations of why do you think she's a whore? What is that about? You don't even have to answer the questions, just start asking them.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for days because I just love your insights and, of course, your humor around things, and the way you get people to ask questions about what they're seeing and what they're interacting with, and you put a face to an industry. It's your experience, but one that people have a lot of assumptions about, and I think you just break through so many of those.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to try and unpack. I love that phrase that became popular.
I agree. Yeah. So where could people find more of your work if they want to see some of your writing or some more of your insights? Where can they go?
Right. So Cesca.com is the main hub. There is some, I would say, softcore on there. So don't go there if that's and if you're on any kind of public Wi-Fi, you won't be allowed to go on there. It's like the domain is blocked. But if you have access, that's a good one. CescaLee.com, that's where I started talking more about kind of divorce and aging and things. But I do talk a little bit about sexual health there. So it's nice to go in there if you have questions about vaginas, the aging vagina. My other obsession. And so those are the two places. I love being on Twitter, and Twitter is a great place to ask questions. And again, it's a little PG-13. I do show some of my curvy, nearly 50-year-old body there. Yeah, so those are the places. My Instagram, not a sex work friendly place. It's definitely cat pictures. Okay. And me getting every single kind of facial possible. I post those pictures.
So Cesca's
not the sex facials, like
thanks for
skincare.
That clarity. Got it. Cesca's Seska, just so people know how to spell it right. And Cesca, we all wish you a happy birthday. I can't believe
Thank you.
50 is coming up.
I know.
You look fabulous.
Thank you. Well, I think we're in the same ballpark, if I remember correctly. And
and hopefully, once all of this you've alluded to, we're in this COVID time and that goes away, let's get together in person and celebrate.
Yes, I would love it too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.